A computer engineering graduate with a lifelong love of automobiles writes a blog about the 10 most embarrassing fighter jets. What can go wrong? Apparently, a lot. Hi, my name is Magnar Nordahl and I have passion for aviation history. A couple of days ago, I stumbled over an article called "These are the most embarrassing fighter jets ever deployed." It was published by hotcards.com. When a magazine publishes articles outside the comfort zone, it's always interesting. The article starts with, quote, "A fighter jet needs to be fast and deadly. Here are 10 that prove to be the complete opposite of that." Then follows a picture of two F-104 Starfighters. It was very fast, and with an internal gun and air-to-air missiles, it was deadly as well. So, why is it here? Curious, I scrolled down to the first aircraft, and to my surprise, it was a fighter from the First World War, the Vickers gunbus. It was truly not the best fighter of its time, but a fighter jet? Not at all. In fact, only 5 of the 10 airplanes in the list have jet engines. The rest have piston engines. That's a big blunder, my friend. But let's be reasonable and change the heading to "These are the most embarrassing fighters ever deployed." So, let's get started. Number 10. Vickers FB5 gunbus. The name gunbus was not specifically used for this airplane, but for a series of similar aircraft designed by Vickers. And dear writer, I'm sorry to be picky, but gunbus is a single word. First flown in 1914, the FB5 was the first purpose-built fighter airplane in the world. According to the blog, it was an awful aircraft. Quote, "The tendency to go into unrecoverable spins and land on an empty fuel tank, causing nose landing hazards, plagued this design. The gunner blocked the pilot's view a lot. It was hard to steer and the lateral stability was awful." Well, if you land with an empty tank, you should blame the pilot, shouldn't you? Contrary, here's a quote from BAE Systems about the same aircraft. "In operational service, the Vickers FB5 gunbus was popular, being maneuverable and easy to fly and capable of defending itself. The type became outclassed, however, as the quality of its German opponents increased." I give my vote to the experts at BAE Systems. Number 9. Mikoyan Gurevich MiG-23. Quote from the blog. "The MiG-23, aka the Flogger, was the Russian-brought counterpart to the American powerhouses F4 and F-111. The latter two planes were both powerful and agile enough to perform attack and interception roles." Seriously? Okay, the US Navy was evaluating the FB-111B, but it was not accepted for carrier use. The US Air Force used the F-111 as a bomber. Together with the MiG-17 and MiG-21, the US Air Force evaluated the MiG-23 in a secret program called Constant Peg. Retired Colonel John Manlark said about the MiG-23, quote, "It was a very unstable airplane, faster than anything we had, but it was just very unstable. It would depart very easily. It would go out of control and spin. The blog states that the MiG-23 is big and heavy. It's not. Many pilots were surprised first time they saw it, because they expected it to be much larger. While it was a lousy dogfighter, the MiG-23 was very powerful and could easily accelerate away from any other aircraft in the world." Number 8. I'm not sure I can pronounce it correctly, but I give it a try. Lavochkin Gorbunov Gudkov Lagtree. In 1941, this was one of the most modern fighters in the Soviet Air Force. Quote from the blog. Its disastrous combination of lightweight wood construction and an underpowered engine meant that it struggled to gain a tactical advantage against stronger German fighters while shattering when damaged. A lightweight wood construction should be an advantage, right? However, despite made mostly of light wood, the airplane was too heavy, underpowered, and riddled with many technical issues. The pilots didn't like it because the controls were sluggish and it had a tendency to enter spin if you pulled too hard on the control stick. Despite the shortcomings, the aircraft remained in production until 1944, undergoing countless modifications on the way. Still, it was inferior to the Messerschmitt Bf 109. On the positive side, the airframe was very strong and it proved to be effective against German bombers. Does it belong to the top 10 list? Not at all. Number 7. Royal Aircraft Factory BE-2. Quote, the Royal BE-2 was one of the first fighter planes put in proper industrial production. What? Have you already forgot the FB5, the first purpose-built fighter? First flown in 1912, the BE-2 served as a light bomber in the beginning of the First World War. But it could not defend itself against more nimble fighters. Still, it remained in service until 1919 as a trainer and coastal patrol aircraft. And despite not being designed as a fighter, it was used as a night fighter against German Zeppelin airships, and it managed to shoot on 6 of them. Number 6. Brevster Buffalo. Quote, the Buffalo was small and intimidated no one. Yes, it didn't fare well against the Japanese Zero, but that was partly because of poor tactics. First flown in 1937, it was one of the first American monoplanes suited for aircraft carrier operations. In 1939, it won a competition against the Grumman F4F Wildcat and became the first monoplane fighter of the US Navy. But by 1941, the Buffalo was already inferior and was later replaced by the F4F Wildcat. And that could have been the end of the story for the Buffalo. But Finland purchased 44 Buffaloes, and they achieved considerable success against Russian bombers and fighters. From 1941 to 1945, the Buffaloes at number 24 Fighter Squadron claimed a victory ratio of 26-1. Therefore, the design was not a complete failure, and certainly it doesn't belong to this list. Number 5. Watt F7U Cutlass. Finally, we have an aircraft that deserves a place on this list. The Cutlass was underpowered and riddled with technical problems, but this claim makes no sense. Quote, the F7U had a raised nose to make room for its complex and unreliable landing gear. The nose landing gear strut was long because it was necessary for takeoff from the aircraft carrier. First flown in 1948, the Cutlass was ahead of its time, maybe too far, because it was riddled with technical problems, and the engines had a tendency to flame out in rain. 320 units were built and more than a quarter of them were destroyed in accidents, killing 4 test pilots and 21 service pilots. This disaster with wings deserves the number 1 spot on this list. Number 4. MacDonald F3H Demon. The Demon was MacDonald's first fighter with swept wings. It was designed as an all-weather interceptor armed with guns and missiles. It was quite stable and behaved well during carrier operations. However, it did not achieve the design goal to be able to maintain supersonic speed in level flight. The Demon's main problem was that it had only one engine, and early jet engines were not so reliable as they are today. And flying a single-engine fighter over the oceans, that was not comforting at all. The Demon paved the way for the F4 Phantom, which became a legend. Does the Demon deserve a place on this list? I doubt it. there are so many other fighters that are worse than that. Number 3. Convair F102 Delta Dagger. First flown in 1953, the Delta Dagger was designed as an interceptor. It was the United States Air Force first supersonic fighter. However, the first prototypes were not able to break the sound barrier. The solution was to redesign the aircraft, incorporating area rule, also called Coke bottle configuration. That made the trick. The new prototype exceeded Mach 1 one day after its first flight. An upgraded version, the F102B, had so many changes that it was redesigned F106 Delta Dart, and it proved to be very successful. The F102 was a modest jet fighter without too many problems and doesn't belong to this list, not even close. Number 2. MacDonald XF85 Goblin. This airplane looks more like a Kinder Egg than a fighter. It was designed to be carried inside a B-36 and used to protect the bomber against Russian interceptors. The size of the Goblin was dictated by the size available inside the B-36, and that meant that many compromises had to be made. The Goblin was attached to a trapeze which was lowered for release and docking. Flight tests were conducted from a B-29 as a mothership. The first flight took place on 23rd of August 1948. The Goblin was released from the bomber, flew for 10 minutes and then made 3 attempts to dock with the trapeze. The Kinder Egg was tossed around in the turbulence under the mothership, and on the 4th attempt the Goblin impacted the trapeze and the canopy broke. The pilot managed to make an emergency landing on a dry lake bed below. 2 Goblins were produced. They made 7 flights in all, whereof 3 ended with emergency landings. In October 1949, the project was cancelled. Therefore, this fighter was not deployed. Maybe we should change the heading to "These are the most embarrassing fighters ever." Number 1. Lockheed F104 Starfighter. What is this fighter doing here? The F104 was the world's first Mach 2 fighter. It was designed by Lockheed as a short-range interceptor with emphasis on climb performance. But as the Starfighters were introduced to the squadrons, it was discovered that the Russian bomber threat was not a big threat at all. Sputnik had been put into orbit, and it became clear that the future threat would come from long-range missiles. Therefore, US Air Force found little use of the F104 because the range was considered to be too short for other roles. An uprated all-weather variant of the Starfighter was exported to Germany and other friendly nations. However, the Starfighter suffered from a very high accident rate, especially in Germany. The main cause was inferior training of the pilots. Norway, my home country, received the first Starfighters in 1963, and they served for nearly 20 years with a good safety record. And Italy had the Starfighter in service until 2004. Therefore, the F104 does not belong to this list. An aircraft is not a failure if you use it for something it was not designed to do. Well folks, this is not how you should do a rating. If I made a top 10 list of the most embarrassing fashion designs of all times, it will be terrible. I suspect the writer has copied information from other top 10 blogs. That's a pitfall, because there is no guarantee that the others are getting the facts right. And some so-called information here is plain wrong. Without proper knowledge about the subject, you are doomed to fail. I really hope the writer has better knowledge about cars. Okay, that's all for this time. Please support my channel and all that. And thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day and happy landing.